Could we remind people, if you're going to make a comment, please speak up as loud as you can.
Yes.
Can you speak in the form of a human being?
Devas are being. Devas are perceived differently according to the spiritual maturity power of the mind. There is a sutta in which the Buddha recounts his experiences in meditation before he became enlightened. He talks about how he reached a certain level of concentration and he was able to recognize like blobs of light. And then as his meditation developed, he was able to begin to be able to recognize figures. And then they became, as his meditation increased in power, he was able to recognize more and more clearly the forms of the devas, and to the extent that finally he was able to recognize what level of what heaven realm they came from, and their past karma, and so on and so forth. So for a very developed mind, they will appear as human beings, usually as tend to be very like young, like early adolescents, and children, bright beings.
I'd like to ask you a question about Thailand. I don't find it off topic, but 3 or 4 days ago there was a monk killed in southern Thailand. It seems to be in reaction to oppression of Muslim separatists down there, or forceful hand used to quell Muslim separatism. And I just wonder whether Buddhism as an organisation is doing anything to mediate this dispute in the South, or ameliorate the dispute?
Yeah, Buddhists are not very organised, that's the problem. They tend to be disorganised in Thailand. There's certainly a problem in Thailand of not really a coherent Buddhist voice. Certainly a coherent Buddhist voice that has any leverage on the powers that be, even though they may be composed of people who consider themselves or claim to be Buddhists. The problem in the south of Thailand has been going on for a long time, and it's made worse. For a long time, the Buddhists and the Muslims in south of Thailand lived together in great harmony in a way that would be a model for anywhere in the world. But as with certain other Buddhist communities in Southeast Asia, since the Middle East became so wealthy, there have been a huge amount of money coming in from the Middle East, and the conditions of the money are that the kind of Islam that has to be propagated is that very extreme kind of Islam, which was quite alien to the Muslim tradition in south of Thailand, and a number of Thais going off to study in Muslim schools overseas. In southern Thailand, I've spoken to monks who tell me about this, that if the monks were building a temple, the Muslim villagers would come over and help, and if they were building a mosque, the Buddhists would go over and help them, and they lived together on very friendly terms. And the kids went to school together. But over 20 years now, the Muslims want their own schools separately from the Buddhists, to have a specifically Muslim education, and that sense of distrust and sense of oppression. There are also all kinds of vested interests involved, including interests in illegal importations of oil and all kinds of natural exploitation of natural resources, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. But Buddhists are being killed on a regular basis every day in the south of Thailand, and monks are being killed on a regular basis. They don't publicize it so much. Some time ago, a monk on Arms Round was chopped to pieces with a machete, and certainly the events that occurred a couple of weeks ago, in which a very extreme military reaction to a Muslim demonstration led to quite shameful, I consider quite shameful deaths of 70 or 80 young Muslims, can only inflame the situation. I think it's quite critical at the moment. So I think there can be sometimes in Thailand on the part of certain people this feeling that we're Buddhists and we always give in and let everybody have their way, and now it's the time to show we can be tough as well, and through that I think they make a grievous mistake.
You made points at one point in time about a certain arrogance that occurs if you read some of the suttas and some of the content of the sutta and say, well, this is going to work, but this I don't understand, this I don't understand post life. Well, how do you understand that kind of reconcile an arrogance with a kind of what the Buddha himself seemed to have advocated, which is really your own authority? And how do you come to know? Let me, if I can reframe the question a bit. Have you had experiences in your practice, in your experience as a being, as a monk, in which you questioned, in which it didn't make sense, and how did you come to know? You can either answer it theoretically or through your own life.
That's a very good question. I apologize if the word perhaps arrogance was a wee bit strong, but I was just pointing out, there is a certain inconsistency, and that I feel that there is a certain point in any discipline that you take on where a leap of faith is demanded, and I would consider that covers science as well. I mean, there are certain basic assumptions on which scientific research is carried on, which are not provable, I would say. For instance, the idea that there is an external world outside of there, independent of human concepts, but that it can be understood with human concepts, and so on. I myself found that there were certain aspects of monastic life, like anyone else, that I could have bridled against, that I didn't particularly enjoy. But because I had this faith in the teaching and faith in my teacher, I was willing to go along with it. And I think in monastic life it's easier than that because of the insistence on morality and the fact that the monastic discipline is kept by everyone, including the teacher, and the teacher has to keep every single rule that a newly ordained monk has to keep. So you have this deep confidence that whatever you might be asked to do, it's never going to be immoral. As far as being asked to believe anything, there isn't that kind of compulsion. But the teacher may say that on the path of practice, if you can take on this view, it will help your practice. And the adoption of certain views, certain frames for experience is conducive to liberation. And that made sense to me. Jim, in his introduction, mentioned that I met Ajahn in England and went out to. I didn't actually meet. I met him in Thailand, and my first meeting with him was a memorable one for me, in that a deep faith arose in me the moment that I saw him and sat there, that enlightenment is real, it's possible in the present day. This is an enlightened being. Now I don't trust my own ability to recognize. I didn't at that time particularly who is an enlightened being and who isn't. But it's just something that arose from by itself. And because I had that faith, I was willing to go with all the discomforts of being a young Englishman in a forest temple in northeast Thailand, the heat, the food, the physical conditions, the cultural differences, and didn't bother me at all, because I had this firm confidence in what I was doing. So although I didn't understand, although I had quite a reasonable theoretical understanding of Buddhist teachings in the early days, from before I became a monk, looking back on it, I don't think that was what really enabled me to survive and thrive as a young monk. But it was more my sense of the deep confidence that I was doing the right thing and that my teacher knew what he was talking about. And that's not to say certain teachings, certain things were, just didn't kind of make sense yet. But then you said, well, just keep doing it. And I made a resolution when I arrived, because I didn't trust my own ability to judge things objectively. I'm going to stay here for 5 years, come what may, even if I hate it, even if it's absolutely miserable. I'm not going to leave this place until I've done a 5-year training. And I found that was one of the wisest things that I did, because I don't know if you know the situation with a Buddhist monk. It takes a long time, particularly in Ajahn Chah tradition, to become a monk. But any monk in any tradition can leave the monkhood extremely easily. There's no ceremony involved. There usually is a ceremony, but there doesn't have to be a ceremony. And all that is needed is for a monk to say to someone who understands what the language he's speaking is, I am no longer a monk. Now, if I was to say that now, mean it, that's it, I'd be no longer a monk. So it's so easy to leave the monkhood, and there's absolutely no stigma involved. In fact, anyone who's been a monk for any length of time is given a great deal of respect in Thai society. That you have to constantly renew your commitment day by day. And it's not like take a lifetime vow and not think about it anymore. It means literally every day. Now, in the early days, if you're not really very strong in your practice, then what tends to happen is that one part of your mind is going like, what can I do to deal with this? How can I practice with this? And one part is, maybe I just go home, give up. And so your energy bifurcates immediately. And I found that by just saying, I won't even consider that as an option, that I just went through it very easily. But the fact I think as Buddhists, someone can express deep doubt or the real sense of I just can't, I just don't feel I can accept teachings on rebirth or on so on and so forth. In fact, we say, Oh, that's a shame, but, I think it's, if you can, it's good, but if you can't, it's all right. I'm not saying you're going to hell, it's valuable and useful, I believe. And I also believe that, at least from what I've seen with a number of Westerners who've become monks with that, and allowed them to, myself, I've allowed people to become monks with that kind of view. In almost any case, without any kind of compulsion or any kind of psychological pressure, I've seen over a number of years monks of their own, through their own experience and practice, come round and say, yeah, that really makes sense to me now. I've not seen anyone really devote themselves to practice in a really intense kind of way over a number of months or years who has found their disbelief or unacceptance of other realms of being to intensify. I've only seen the opposite happen, and I think that's quite interesting. I think also it is incumbent upon, if I'm not sure whether an agnostic attitude to this is always workable. I think there are certain phenomena, certain events that it's worth saying, well, if that's not a hypothesis that I accept, then I can't just live without a hypothesis. I need an alternative hypothesis. And some time ago, I spoke with a Lao diplomat who'd been the ambassador in Cambodia for a period of time. And we were chatting, and we were onto this kind of subject, and he said, before there's one part of Buddhism that I couldn't really relate to. And he said something really strange happened while I was in Phnom Penh. He said a woman came from the countryside with three sons, three small boys, the eldest one about 4 years old. And it turned out that the eldest boy, who brought up in the middle of nowhere, could speak Russian spontaneously, and he insisted that he wasn't the woman's son, that he wanted to go home, back to Moscow, and he could even tell what his address was, what his name was, and of course his mother didn't pay any attention, but she believed in rebirth and being a Buddhist, and was kind of somewhat taken by it. Eventually, she took her son to Phnom Penh and went to the Russian embassy. And so the eldest boy is saying, my two younger brothers are just my friends. They're not my brothers, and you're not my mother. My mother's in Russia. So they went to the embassy. Of course, the embassy officials were stunned, but they at least they went to the instead of getting in touch with Moscow and making some inquiries. And it turned out at the address that the young boy had given, the family had a son who was in the Russian army, who was posted to Cambodia, and had been driving a jeep with two other soldiers, and they'd hit a landmine in rural Cambodia, quite close to this village where these three boys were built. And he said, I never believed in this stuff before, but now I do. And I mean, for me, the hypothesis that these three Russian soldiers were reborn as three brothers in this Cambodian family is one that I find satisfying and most reasonable explanation. But I also, because there might be other hypotheses that could perhaps explain that phenomenon. But certainly, I feel there does need to be an alternative hypothesis to say, well, if there is no rebirth, how do you explain that kind of thing that happens? And I mean, that's just one. I mean, I know other cases. I won't give a lot of stories, but you may know Professor Ian Stevenson, University of Virginia, who's been working on this for 20, 30 years and in a very scientific way. So, I mean, if you're interested in reality, the way things are, I mean, it's a very fascinating aspect. I mean, and it affects us. It affects your existential situation as a human being, whether or not, what happens after you die.
I'd like to maybe go back to what you could maybe refresh or deepen
as to how to proceed if one has broken precept, and then dealing with that, or if someone else has broken precept. Can you remind me what was the skillful means, and if there's anything else you want to add to that?
Yes. We in our life as Buddhist monks, we before a fortnightly recitation of the monks' discipline, the full moon and dark moon, there's a recitation of discipline in the Pali language. The monks pair off and they go through this small ceremony in the Pali language, but the essence of it is, you say, I have committed such and such an offence, and then the other monk says, do you see that? Meaning, do you see that as an offence? And he says, and you say yes. And he says, you should refrain from doing that in the future. And say, yes, and also I will. And that kind of encapsulates this process of one accepting, recognizing, yes, this was breaking the precept. So that's the first one. This the honesty with yourself. Yes, that was breaking the precept. And secondly, not only not trying to conceal it, but also to reveal it. Now, what's ideal is to reveal it to your spiritual teacher, not perhaps every day, but if you were to go and see a spiritual teacher once a week even, that you might have an agreement with him that you could confess offences that you've committed over the past week, and that has a definite psychological effect if you know at the end of the week you're going to reveal those offences. We don't use the word confess, it's a revealing, non-concealment. If one lacks like a spiritual teacher, then a friend. Sometimes monks make this a practice. Two monks are really close friends, and they'll say, let's meet every evening and just review our sila over the day and go through this little ceremony. And that really creates a really beautiful bond between monks when they take that on, because there's a lot of trust that's involved. But if you have a fellow Dhamma practitioner who you're very close to and who you feel you can trust with private details of your life and what's going on, then that's a wonderful thing to do also. At the very least, if you have a shrine or in your house, to bow to the Buddha and to reveal it to the Buddha at least as a kind of a ceremonial recognition and a sense of revealing something. Even to say something out loud in front of a Buddha image can be quite powerful. And the third, and probably the most important, is to make a firm intention in your mind not to do that again. And not just a firm intention, but also to sit and go through it again. What happened there? What were the causes and conditions that led up to that? This is a kind of skill you develop. In what particular situations, with what particular people, under what particular conditions do you find that you tend to act or speak in unskillful ways? You might say, well, when I had a really hard day at work and I come home tired and the kids are this or so-and-so is that. So in that case, after you've had a hard day, before you get out of the car, you just sit quietly, just breathe in, breathe out a few times, and say, got to be really careful now. This is the kind of time I've lost my temper in the past, and this is my challenge this evening. If he does this, she does that. Can I maintain my mindfulness? Yeah.
It's kind of hard for me to formulate this question. It has to do with relationship relating to one's immediate environment, whether that be at work, at home, in one's community. When the environment seems to be in some fashion degenerated, how much attention should we give to changing our environments as opposed to just enduring?
Yeah.
And what would be the skillful means as to approach making that decision, whether to remain in a particular situation that might be unwholesome, or to just simply stay within it and
patience and endure it. I guess what I'm getting at is that I see that I've got a tendency either to sort of become passive, and then as soon as taking a course of action, there's always the greater danger and risk that there's going to be agitation, and there's going to be unpleasant emotions.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's a difficult one, and there's no kind of hard and fast rules for this. But I think coming back to that, to this basic teaching of the 5 precepts, I think that if you're in a situation in which it's impossible to keep the 5 precepts, but it's better to change the situation if you possibly can. I mean, not everyone is able to change the situation in that way, but if you are able to do that, whether it's in terms of livelihood or place you're living or whatever, then the ability, the opportunity to live a life within the framework of the 5 precepts and to use those as the training in your mindfulness in everyday life, I feel is absolutely fundamental to true progress in Dhamma. If there is something which needs to be done or needs to be said, but you feel cause a lot of conflict, then it really needs ability to step back from that and really look very closely at what's going on. To what extent there is a sense of the need to control things and the need to know how something is going to turn out, or just the aversion towards strong emotions and just wanting to keep your mind calm and not wanting any kind of disturbance, even though sometimes, particularly in lay life, that you have to be ready to deal with certain kinds of disturbance. I mean, in monastic life it happens sometimes as well. But that sense of being a learner, being someone who's seeking to learn from life, and both the situations that we like and the situations we don't like, and seeing how sometimes one thing can lead to the other quite unpredictably. So, 5 precepts: mindfulness, the willingness to look and be very honest about one's intentions and one's hopes and fears and the rationale behind one's actions, then to choose a course of action and to bear with it and to take responsibility for it.
Just like your monastic meaning or the Buddhist meaning, what does that mean?
Jaya means victory and Sara means essence. So one is the essence of victory. A friend of mine says it means essentially victorious.
May I continue from that lady's questions that what is the victories about?
Yeah, I was just given the name, I didn't choose it. Well, I mean, there's the sense of, the victory over greed, hatred and delusion. The Buddha said the victory over 1,000 enemy soldiers in battle is not equal to the victory over your own heart, or the defiance in your own heart. Yeah.
This is perhaps a related question, and it goes back to what you were speaking about before about in Thai society, the violence that's going on in the South right now. It seems to me that over the past several years there has been a general rise in violence in Thai society. especially violence directed by and for the state. And the thousands of people killed in Prime Minister Thaksin's war on drugs, and the many killings that have happened in southern Thailand over the past couple of years. And I'm wondering what the proper response is of a Buddhist, not necessarily everyday Buddhist, but a Buddhist ruler, a Buddhist with power, to violence such as that, and how that might reflect on the other forms of violence that are going on elsewhere in the world.
Well, the whole question of what a Buddhist ruler might be in this day and age is a questionable one. I mean, certainly the powers that be in Thailand generally consider themselves Buddhist. I feel there's a real crisis of education in Thailand, that people don't really study, understand the implications of being a Buddhist and not applying Buddhist teachings successfully in their life and in their professions or in their duties to the country and to the state. I don't think there's no concept of righteous indignation in Buddhism. There's no concept of righteous killing in Buddhism. It's always bad karma to intentionally kill another human being, whatever your reason for it might be. There's just no way around that. You can't justify it through the Buddhist teachings in any way. I feel that it's not only wrong, bad karma, it's also unintelligent. And I think my answer to it, long-term answer, is kindergarten education. That's where I'm putting my energies in terms of what I do, practically speaking, for instilling more Buddhist values in society. I think this generation is a bit difficult, so I'm looking at kindergarten, elementary education.
In practice, how do you do it in terms of teaching
because I'm basically essentially a hermit. I don't do that much hands-on teaching. I don't teach the children so much, although I visit the school every now and again if I go to Bangkok. But I'm a spiritual advisor of the teacher of the school, and I teach the teachers. Because I feel the essential thing is have good quality of teachers. So the schools that I advise are private schools, and so we can be quite choosy about the teachers. All the teachers who teach have to make a commitment to the 5 precepts and to doing retreats every year and to meditate. And of course, being a Buddhist school and being known to be a Buddhist school, then of course the parents choose that school from a number of options in the private sector. So it means that they already have a certain sense of commitment to Buddhist principles. So it's very important, I feel, that there is this harmony of approach between teachers and the parents, and they understand each other and following a similar line. And yes, I'm trying to give inspiration, guidance, and to share my reflections on the teachings and the ways that they can be applied in daily life. For instance, say precepts. Now I feel for kids, you can, even with quite young kids, you can get together and say, look, how would you like to live together? What do you think would be a really nice way? What do you think would be nice for us to live, as a way for us to live? And you gradually say, well, we'd like to all be friends, and not to have to feel afraid or not have to worry that if someone's going to steal our things or lie to us or cheat to us. And we get the children to come out with these things themselves. They say, well, okay, well, how do we get from where we are now to that ideal situation? How can we do that? Is it possible? And then we say, well, what the Buddha said is that we can all make an agreement, not to harm each other, not to hit each other, not to hurt each other. And if we keep that all together, and we don't take anything that belongs to anybody else, then we've got a good chance that we can make that kind of dream come true in our school. And so you're talking about precepts, as they relate to how does it feel if somebody takes something that's yours? How does it feel if someone comes up behind you and hits you? It's not very nice, is it? What can we do? Do we have to live like that? Is it necessary? So, applying these teachings as best we can to the life and the level of understanding of children. And I'm very interested and inspired in this.
Has this practice been brought into the West?
To the West?
Yes. Your concept of dictionary practice.
Well, I mean, not in that kind of level where it's sort of spreading around the globe. I mean, there are kind of parallel things going along. For instance, the city of 10,000 Buddhas in near Bayagiri. There's a Dhamma school in England, and of course, I mean, cultural differences. Let's say, for instance, in the city of 10,000 Buddhas, the majority of children are coming from non-Buddhist families, and of course with the whole question of separation of church and state and so on, that there are certain constraints, and wanting to make it clear we're not trying to indoctrinate your children and so on. Whereas I'm quite happy to indoctrinate children, actually, in a wholesome way. I mean, all the kids take the 5 precepts every morning, and I think by taking the 5 precepts in their own language together with the 5 positive principles that complement them. So I refrain from taking life, and I adopt the principle of kindness and compassion as a life principle. And I think if you have kids from the age of 2 years old reciting that every day, that I think it's a kind of an indoctrination I can live with.
Venerable Ajahn, I feel really privileged. It's my first live talk from a real-life Buddhist monk, so privileged, and thank you for the talk. I'd like to ask you about your solitary hermitage, because that's one thing I think about a lot, like going away somewhere in the mountains.
What word?
And just kind of being solitary and living household about.
Yeah, I would say it won't work. It's very, very difficult to live by yourself unless you've gone through a very thorough monastic training. That would be at least 5 years. That's the standard in my tradition. You've got to be able to live with other people before you can live with yourself successfully. You feel that, if you're by yourself, no distractions, no difficulties with other people's egos and so on. It sounds great, but it's a very, very humbling experience. It's very, very difficult. If you're living in a spiritual community, it's a lot more flat. If you're living by yourself, the ups and downs are much more pronounced. When you go high, you can go really high because you don't have any sort of duties to anybody else and anything. When you go low, and it's very difficult to find your way up again. Whereas if you're with a group, it's kind of moderating. It's difficult to get so high because there are other things going on all the time. And it's difficult to get so low because you've got friends that can help to support you. So I believe you have to go through quite a long training first before you can be confident that you can go off by yourself and really make something of it. That being said, and the monastic training is offered in my monastery, monks do have periods in a year of solitude, so they do have the opportunity to train. So to the ideal being of a flexibility where you can maintain a practice irrespective of the external conditions. So you may have a time where you're living in a large community and perhaps taking on a responsibility. You're the monastery storeman, you're the monastery work manager, you're the librarian or whatever, and you can practice completely alone without any kind of friendship and support, and just totally alone with your body and mind. So having certain periods of both alternating throughout the training, but to the idea of going off by yourself on a long-term basis without that training, I think will be disappointing.
John, just on a related question, how would you advise lay people who maybe aren't prepared to make the commitment to become a monk, but are trying to deepen their practice? You see value in retreats or that kind of thing? Maybe you could talk about.
Yes, I do. I think it to spend certain time every year on retreat, away from your familiar surroundings and your daily responsibilities. One, it gives you an opportunity to practice meditation in a much more focused and continuous kind of way, and can give you new perspectives on problems in your daily life, some things that you may be considered like really major issues when you're on retreat where it's nothing, and on the other hand something that you daily life you may think just nothing. You think, oh, that's really, on retreat you realize that's really significant. I've got to do something about that. So you do get a lot of insights that way. But I think also, again, if you do a period of retreat, you will, in most cases, experience a level of peace which you're unlikely to be able to access on your daily practice as a lay person. And that's just gives you so much energy and so much confidence in your ability to practice. You know, even if your faith in the teachings never wavers appreciably, often your faith in your own capacity to realize them can do so. And that period of retreat can just bring back that sense of, yeah, I can do this. And that's really important to be able to have that in your life. So I think one, you know, there are a lot of things about present day society which are not conducive to practice of Dhamma, but, you know, compared with any previous generation, you know, we have leisure time, you know. That's a new phenomena in human society. You know, take a week off work and go to a monastery. I mean, that's a wonderful thing.
Just to follow up on that question, could you talk about jhana practice?
What would you like to?
Anything you'd like to offer. I'm not looking for anything particular.
Okay. Asking about jhana practice. I have a friend, a monk, who just got so frustrated trying to develop jhana, really refined levels of concentration. I remember we were taking our daily meal one day, and he just said, "Jhana, oh, just take bananas." So, if you set up jhana as a kind of a goal, it can be very frustrating. As can become kind of all or nothing kind of practice. But if you practice concentration and mindfulness, there's a lot of debate. You know, I don't know how much you know about these debates between samatha and vipassana, and it just goes, oh no, it's really boring. So I won't go into all that. But sometimes people say, well, jhana is just samatha and we're doing mindfulness before. But if any cursory examination of the text will see that one of the most fundamental features of the mind in jhana is extremely pure mindfulness. So when he says he's doing jhana, he's not doing mindfulness, so that, I don't think that's really supported by the teachings of the Buddha. Samma samadhi, right samadhi, as a factor of the Eightfold Path, is always defined in the suttas as the 4 jhanas. And what it means, jhana means, is on the path of meditation, after letting go of all distractions, transcending what are called the 5 hindrances, the mind enters a state of calm. The 5 hindrances are, in short, an interest in the will towards everything else except what you're doing. So it can be all kinds of fantasies, imagination. It's not just unwholesome sensual desires. It could be thoughts of novels you've read, sport, politics, anything and everything in the world except your breath or your meditation object. If you have an interest in that and prefer that to your breath, then this is a hindrance. Second is ill will. And it can be ill will toward, you can be meditating and you can think of somebody and something somebody's done or said, and just suddenly it boils up, how dare they? And that's definitely a hindrance. Also, you're sitting meditating and you get your ill will towards the weather, towards the mosquitoes, towards this person. Why do they have to walk so loudly? Can't they? Why don't they have any consideration at all? And so that kind of irritation, but also irritation and dissatisfaction with yourself and your ability to meditate. I'm so hopeless and it's too difficult. And dissatisfaction with meditation itself and just sort of wanting to give up. The third hindrance is the hindrance of sloth, torpor, sleepiness, dullness, mental rigidity. Sometimes when you're meditating, it's like, have you ever taken butter out of a fridge and tried to butter a piece of bread? That's what the mind's like sometimes, that kind of rigidity. And that's the hindrance of tinitta. Fourth is mental agitation, monkey mind, running around all over the place, and coupled with kind of anxiety, guilt about things done and not done in the past. Fifth is kind of doubt, but not in the sense of recognition that you don't have enough information to make a decision, and so you doubt what's the right thing to do. It's the doubt where you know what it is, but you're just not ready to make a kind of a leap and commit yourself. You want to know beforehand it's all going to work out all right for sure, and then maybe something else. And these five hindrances are bad news in meditation. And Buddha says the first one is like being in debt. That's the sensual desire. The second one is like having a fever. The third one is like being in prison. That's the sloth and torpor and dullness. Fourth one, mental agitation, is like being a slave. And the fifth one is like being lost in a lonely place. Now, when you develop mindfulness to the extent that those 5 things are not present, you realize they're not present. You just get this incredible feeling of well-being. And the Buddha says it's like someone who's no longer in debt, recovered from a fever, released from prison, no longer a slave, and found the path home. Because you feel really good. And then the meditation starts to become just like really smooth. You're in the groove now, you don't have to put a lot of effort, it's just kind of naturally going. And this is the state of samadhi, which is called upachara, or neighborhood concentration. And if that concentration intensifies, it leads to what we call jhana. And jhana, the first jhana, is characterized by 5 dominant features. The first is that the mind is placing itself on the object naturally, without fail. And this is called vitakka, or initial thought. Secondly, once the mind comes onto it and holds onto it, it's aware of it, it receives certain information about it, and then there's vitakka vichara, like a bird flapping its wings and gliding, or a bell. The bell is the initial thought, and the resonance of the bell is the sustained thought. Simultaneously with that, there's a sense of rapture and a very deep sense of bliss, and the mind is one and concentrated, unified in one place. These are the characteristics of the first jhana. As the mind becomes more refined, the coarser elements of that mental state fall away. The vitakka and the vichara, the mind is just completely still and radiant. There's no need to meditate on an object anymore. Then, as the mind becomes clearer and more refined, the sense of rapture falls away, until eventually the bliss falls away, and there's just this really deep sense of equanimity and knowing. So it's a mind. At this point, there's no breath. You don't feel as if you're breathing. There's no input from the sensory world, and you're in a world of your own, which is completely still, completely bright, luminous, wonderful. Then, after a certain period of time, the mind withdraws from that state. And what does it mean by withdrawing is there's a gradual reoccurrence of more subtle mental phenomena, of thoughts, feelings, or whatever, and the body starting to reappear. So at this point, the mind has entered for a second time this state which I call upajjhara. Now, you have working with the five hindrances, going beyond the five hindrances, entering upajjhara to jhana. It doesn't necessarily have to be all four, it could be one, or first and second, whatever, and then emerging from jhana into upajjhara for a second time. Now, the teachers of my tradition would say that although the entry into jhana is not one in which wisdom and vipassana can take place, nevertheless, the mind which is in upajjhara the second time, although it's the same state, has the same name, is far, far more powerful. Its ability to develop insight into the three characteristics is far, far enhanced. It's far, far preferable, therefore, than using the initial upajjhara state as the basis for vipassana. Nevertheless, it's not always so clear-cut as that, in that if someone reaches the first state of upajjhara, I hope I'm not losing you here, the first state of upajjhara and decides to develop vipassana, the mind has a mind of its own and may go into jhana anyway. And often the mind will switch backwards and forwards between appana or jhana and upajjhara. It's like work and rest. The jhana state is the state of replenishment of energy and energization of the body. So these are the higher level of samadhi practice.
We're pretty close to the end of our official time, but if there are any more sort of burning questions, maybe Ajahn could take one or two more before we wrap up.
Ajahn, I just want to know about the schedule for after Tuesday, after the 8th tomorrow. Are you leaving, or are you still? Where are you deciding right now?
Where am I then?
Yeah, for the next week, for your schedule.
What's today's Sunday, isn't it? On Tuesday, I'm returning to Seattle. And I'll be in Seattle until late night Thursday when I return to Thailand. Yeah. Don't know when I'll be back again, but
I really hate to try to draw an end to this because I think we're just steaming along very nicely there. But some people may have made plans. I think it's still worth mentioning if there are any more questions that people might want to get out before we do wrap up. Now it's your last chance. Any last burning items? If not, I have a few little housekeeping items, and then we'll explore options on how to express our thanks to Ajahn. I want to remind people there is a donation box, and next to the donation box is another box of dharmically charged Chinese fortune cookies. I don't know if these have any special power. They're actually left over from Langara's open house celebrations yesterday. People are welcome to those near the donation box. And I'd like to repeat that if people would like to be on the Friends of Thailand contact list for future events of this nature or Thai cultural events, please put your name and contact phone number or email. You can drop it in the donation box as well. I don't think I mentioned at the beginning that the Friends of Thailand is a local organization that deals with promoting Thai, Canadian understanding of Thai culture, and we are responsible for arranging the venue for this particular talk. But the Friends of Thailand Society and the Pacific Rim Department at Langara College. But the overall visit to Canada of Ajahn Jayasaro was arranged by Kunpiriya, who is somewhere here. Kunpiriya, is she inside or outside right now? So that's Kunpiriya at the back. So we have a vote of thanks to her. And let's see. We also have a notice from someone here who needs a ride to North Van. So if anybody is, after the talk, is going near Taylor Way on the highway, would you like? Cancel the request for a ride to North Van. They're sitting beside each other. Now, I think in a traditional Thai situation, when the monks have given their Dharma talk, people do the traditional triple bow as a way of departing and also expressing thanks. Or we could clap our hands. I've checked with a couple people, and one way to express our thanks to Ajahn is to use the expression satu. I don't know what satu means. Great. So that's appropriate. We say that 3 times, and Kunvitit has agreed to sort of lead us in this expression of our thanks. Please.
Or we just say Satu, S-A-D-H-U, Satu 3 times together. Okay. Satu.
I guess that makes us officially done. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. First, I recognize a lot of local Buddhists that we've seen before. I'm really glad that you could come and enjoy this.